Hello everybody, welcome back to my RC plane channel, where I'm continuing on with my build series of this Aeromite RC plane. So this is not a build from a kit. I'm building this plane off of a set of plans that I obtained for free online. If you're interested in this plane and you want to build this plane, check out my introduction video. I mentioned a few different ways on how you can obtain these plans. So again, real quick, this is the Aeromite RC plane. It's a balsa wood RC plane, 36-inch wingspan. It's going to have 4 channels. It's going to be powered by a 15 size glow engine. I'm going to be using an OS 15 LA glow engine on this, which I'll have a short video on at some point here pretty soon. And for those of you who run electric, I'm sure you could do that for this plane as well. Okay, let's go ahead and continue on with the build. As you can see here, I have a bunch of the fuselage parts laid out. So in the previous 2 videos, I used the plans and I cut the pieces for the fuselage. I started with the fuselage sides, which are these longer pieces here, and the doublers for that, and I glued those on. And then in the last video, I cut all of the formers out as I have laid out right here. So again, if you're interested in seeing that, check out those previous 2 videos. So in this video, I'm excited because I'm going to start building up the fuselage. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to lay the plans down, and then I'm going to transfer the locations of the various formers onto the fuselage sides by just basically, I'm going to extend these lines out on the plan, and I'll just use those lines to mark the locations of the formers on the sides here. And then once I get those marked out, we'll come back and we'll line up our various formers on that. We'll glue those down onto one side, and then we'll just come back and we'll attach the other side. So I'll get my plans laid out and we'll get started. And then just a reminder, as I mentioned in one of my earlier videos, for my building board, I'm just using, this is just a common ceiling, kind of a drop ceiling or acoustic ceiling panel. It's a 2x4 foot panel. It's about a 1/2 inch thick. It's sort of like a fiber material, but it's it's pretty stiff. It's nice for pinning into. You can put your pins into it. You can pin down your different wood parts and such. It's very nice to work with. So that's good. That's what I'm using for my building board. So when I get to actually gluing parts together on the plans, I will put down some plastic wrap. You can also use like parchment paper or wax paper, different types of things you can use to do that. But I will do that when I get to that step. But for right now, because I need to draw on the plans, I'm not going to put any plastic on it. So F2, it's at the tip, kind of in the front of the fuselage here. We don't really need to mark it because it can't really go anywhere else. But I'll just go ahead and mark it for demonstration purposes, just for fun. We'll just do some line right here. Now we can move on to the next one. So this one's we do have to mark because there's no way to locate them otherwise. Well, I just realized that I didn't really need to mark the upper part because we're only attaching these different formers to this section right here. So I just needed to mark the lower portion because it's already marked on the plan. No big deal. Okay, so now I have all the formers marked out on this side. I have to make some little bit of adjustments here and there. Again, you know, when I'm doing this on the camera, sometimes I'm kind of stretching around things to try to get the right angle on things, and sometimes I need to go make a few little bit of adjustments. That's just the way it goes for me as I make these videos. I just need to make a little couple corrections here and there, but I think we're good. So now I'm going to go ahead and mark the other side, and the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to line up this side of the fuselage with this one. And if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I like to use these 1, 2, 3 blocks. These are machinist blocks. I have a couple sets of these things. These are machined at 90-degree angles. The reason they're called 1, 2, 3 blocks is because they're 1 inch thick, 2 inches wide, and 3 inches long. And obviously they're square and they're heavy, so they're really nice for lining things up. Use them to sort of hold things and get things lined up at right angles, and really helpful. And they're not too expensive, and you can look for them online. They're just called 1, 2, 3 blocks. You can get a set for around 20 bucks. Not too bad. Alright, well, both these sides are finished now, and like always, I'm going to check and double check to make sure things are lined up properly. And again, this isn't going to be perfect, but I will make little adjustments as I need to. One thing I noted that I think would be helpful is, because of the way I did it at least, you know, when I put this one on here like this, and then I put this one over here, it actually would have been useful to extend these all the way up, extend these lines all the way up here, so that when I lined up these pieces like such, obviously if I had the line all the way up here, I could just trace it from this side. Alright, well, one thing I wanted to point out before we start gluing the formers onto the fuselage sides is that the fuselage is the same width from the front of the airplane all the way down to F6. From this point to the tail, we start to get that taper. Now, the way we want to do this is set the side of the fuselage down on the plan like this, and then I'm going to start with F3, and we're going to glue F3, F4, F5, and F6 perpendicular to the side of the fuselage. I'm going to hold off on F1 and 2 until later. And then, once we have those glued on, we will then take our other side and we'll line it up on the plan and we'll glue it together. And then we will join the tail section, or the tip of the tail, together without putting in F7 or F8 yet, which are these two guys here, F7 and F8. The reason we want to do that is because if we put all of the formers on, well, if we put on the F7 and F8 as we did with the previous ones, if we did that perpendicular, when we went to join or went to bring the two fuselage sides together at the tail, because we bend the two sides together, what would happen is F7 and F8 would basically rotate out of position. I hope that makes sense, right? So the way we want to do it is do F3 through F6, join the tail at the tip here, and then we'll insert F7 and F8 into the fuselage and get it lined up that way. Okay, well, I'm going to be using my thin and thick CA from Starbond. I like the Starbond brand, and I'll be using the thin to do the initial attachment of the formers, and then I'll come back, and once all of those are attached, I'll come back with the thick CA and I'll reinforce that. I'll be using my 1, 2, 3 block as a square. I have it wrapped in some plastic wrap so I don't glue it down onto the plane. And if you don't have one of these, obviously just a typical little square, is very useful. All right, so now for the fun part, we're going to attach our other side now onto our formers. And I'm going to try to get it as lined up as good as I can, but I'm going to pay particular attention to this where the wing attaches to the fuselage here. I want to make sure that of all places, I want this to have the best alignment here. So I'll pay particular attention to that. So let me go ahead and get this lined up as close as I can, and then we will glue it. Okay, well I think I've got it lined up pretty close. I put a weight on the front up here just to hold it down so I don't knock it by accident. But I can check a couple spots. For example, we can check the front up here. And you can see I got a pretty good alignment there. Pull it back a little bit. And then we can check a few other areas. You can see, hopefully you can see down in here, I'm pretty close right there. Same thing on this side, pretty close. Now that it's tacked on with my thin, I also put a little bit of thick on there. I'll pull these weights off and we'll flip it over and we'll just reinforce everything with some more CA. All right, well there we have it, and looks pretty good, but I have an issue. So if you look at it, you can see F5 Okay, I had to move my camera a little bit, but if you look at this, obviously F5 is too narrow. I'm not really sure why that is. I measured it against the plan just now and it's the right size. All the other formers are the same width, and I measured across this across the fuselage, and the width is good, constant. So this one ended up being a little bit too narrow. I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just pull this one out of here. It's easy enough to fix. I'll just pull this out of here, make it a little bit wider, and stick it back in. All right, well, there's my old piece that I pulled out. That was easy enough, and I just made another one, and it should fit. We'll have to line it up, but we'll just get it right in here, and we'll glue that one in. But in any case, that's just what happens. Welcome to my imperfect world. Okay, so my replacement F5 is now in there and everything's good now. So let's go ahead and let this cure for a little bit, and then we'll come back and we will join the tail section. So I'll let this sit for a little while, and it's all, well, mostly cured, so it's nice and strong now. So I'll move on to joining the tail section here. And then one thing I wanted to point out is that here you see this little post. It's called a stern post. It's a 1/8 inch by 1/4 inch piece of balsa wood, and that just kind of slides down in, or is in between the very tips of the end of the fuselage parts, which I'll show you right here. You see it right there. It's a very small piece of wood. So what I'm going to do is I have a piece of this is 1/8 inch balsa. I think it's about a 1/2 inch wide or so. I'm just going to trim this into like that wedge shape, and we'll use that to put like right in here. All right, so now we can go ahead and start to join our tail section together. Their little piece here. Okay, so one thing we need to be careful of is that we want to bring these together. Obviously, we want it to be symmetrical down the axis of the fuselage. We don't want the sides to sort of go off like this or like that, right? We want it to be nice, like a nice mirror image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by eyeballing it to where I think it needs to be. I'm going to clamp this little dude in here, and I'll come back and I'll just slide these into the fuselage and see how it looks, and I'll just work with it until I get it lined up to where I think it needs to be. I'll use the plans here and there, and of course I'll eyeball it. I'll put it back, take a look at it from a little bit of a distance, make sure it's all good, and then we'll hit it with our glue. Okay, well that's the general idea of my approach to this. I will need to spend some time to make sure that it's lined up the way it needs to be. I'll probably have to take these clamps off and make a little bit of adjustments here and there. So once I get it all lined up to where I think it needs to be, we'll come back and we will glue it. All right, folks, well that is probably going to be the hardest step of this build, I think, is just trying to get that tail section lined up. At least for me it was. Maybe it won't be for you. But what I ended up doing was using my weights, my blocks here, to get the fuselage lined up on the plans, and looking down on the plans, trying to make sure everything was as straight as I can get it. Looking down on here, and as we go toward the back, you can kind of see I got it really close. And then, of course, toward the very tip here at the tail, again, as close as I could get it. So now I'm just going to go ahead and glue this. I'll check it one more time. I'll just check it before I hit it with the glue, but I think that's going to be as good as I can get it. Alright, while the tail section cures, I thought I would go ahead and install the engine mounts, which is just this 3/8 inch hardwood that's going to slide into those little rectangular slots we made. So I just want to mark it, cut it, and then I'm going to epoxy them in. And then once they're installed, I will install F2. And for this, I'm just going to be using Bob Smith Industries 30-minute epoxy. So I let this sit for a while, and now everything I think is cured for all the glue and the epoxy. Let's take a look and see what we got. Now I just need to trim off these little extras here. One thing I wanted to point out real quick is that I mistakenly put a gap below my two formers, my F3 and my F4. I misread the plans thinking that I had like a little bit of a gap between those and the bottom of the plane here, which was not correct. So I just filled those in. I used 1/8 inch stock balsa, and I just put a couple little strips in here and filled them in. So yeah, so everything should be flush on here. So I think in my previous video or one of my earlier videos, I mentioned that that I thought there was a gap like right below here, but there isn't. So the former should go all the way down to the bottom. No big deal. It's filled in and it'll work okay. And then for the front here, it looks kind of weird because it's all sort of open, but this is all going to get filled in with blocks, and then the whole thing's going to get kind of sanded down into sort of a curved nose. So right now it's open like this. It's going to have a block on the top and some blocks in the bottom and such. Okay, well, the next step, I think I'm going to be, like I mentioned, putting in some of the blocks up here in the nose section. I am going to leave this open because I'm going to make this a hatch. The way the plans have it is that they mentioned that just kind of cover the whole thing with sheeting, and basically you wouldn't be able to get to your fuel tank. So I'm going to make actually a little hatch that I can remove so I can get to my fuel tank. I don't know if I'll do that in the next video, but I'm going to be working on the front, the nose up here, and I may do some sheeting for the rest of the top of the fuselage and such. So we'll see how it goes. All right, well, that's going to be about it. Thanks for watching my channel, and we'll see you next time.